The subject of our lesson study today is strangers in your gates. Strangers in your gates. Is anybody out there? Am I talking to myself? Okay.
There are
All
others.
right. Well, the lesson begins by mentioning when the scribes came to Jesus, they wanted to know what was the greatest commandment. And Jesus answered that question by telling them or giving them the affirmation of God as one Lord. And then he added to that, you ought to love the Lord with all of your heart, all of your soul, all of your mind, all of your strength.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And he said, this is the first great commandment. And then he went on to tell them about the second, even though they didn't ask about the second one. But the second one is very important. And he also understood among them that they were really not in harmony with the second one, or the first one for that matter. At least at times and from time to time. And so he said the second one is like unto it, and you should love your neighbor as yourself.
Yes.
And then he went on to say there are no commandments greater than these. In other words, he linked them together. And there are no commandments greater than these. Jesus linked the love of God with one loving his neighbor into one command. And that command, he says, is the greatest of all of the commandments.
Mm-hmm.
So he tied them all together in one, really. And that's why we say your first four is your love to God, for God, and the second six is your love to man. In other words, when you boil all of the commandments down, they really are about love. They are not just about restrictions, but about love. And this is what he wanted his people to know. This wasn't new to the Jews. This wasn't new at all. This was something that they had known or should have known before. And he called them to love their neighbor as they do themselves. Now we're moving on to that strangers within your gates. All right, Sunday's lesson exercise, or excuse me, not exercise, circumcise your heart. Circumcise your heart. When you read Deuteronomy chapter 10 and verse 1 through 10, what's really happening here? And what is it that God is actually saying or helps his people to understand in this passage, or in these passages 1 through 10? Anybody want to elaborate a little bit? Okay, well, basically, we remember the story of Moses in the mount with God, received the 10 commandments, there for 40 days. Actually, God knew even before Moses went back down to the foot of the mountain what was going on. They were worshiping another God, and God told Moses, "Hurry up, get on back down there." Of course, God knew what was going on, but when Moses got down there to see it, he saw what they were doing. He took the commandments that God gave him and smashed them on the ground. He was so disappointed. He he knew what God had done for them, and now look what they are doing, worshiping calves that they worship in Egypt. So they had broken the covenant, is what they had done by worshiping. They had broke the covenant.
Uh-huh.
And Moses throwing down the commandments was typical or typified the fact that you broke the commandments, you broke the covenant that you made with God, actually, and he hated that. This signified, the breaking of the commandments signified the breaking of the covenant. Okay, and so God had broken his covenant with them as well. But God told Moses to go ahead and hew out some stone like you did the first one, some new tables, and I'm gonna write up on them again. And he went back up into the mountain, and God wrote this covenant, which was significance of God forgiving them. They had broke the covenant. I'm gonna make another covenant with you. He rewrote the commandments again on tables of stone, signifying his forgiveness of their breaking the first covenant that he had given to them. And so God really wanted them to understand. You see, at any point, you guys can get in and make points, okay? At any point, step in, inject what stood out in this lesson to you, the strong points or whatever, or ask whatever questions you may ask. I'm kind of setting the table of putting up the setting the table, and so God wanted them to really, he wanted them to understand that, though circumcision was, your physical circumcision actually was something that was an outward sign of something that should be inward. In other words, your actual circumcision doesn't mean anything. It points to something. It really points to circumcise your heart. In other words, I want your heart. I want your affection. I want your mind. I want your love. In other words, God says, circumcise your heart. I don't just, the outward sign is really nothing. It points to what's important, and that is your heart. And I want you to circumcise your heart. I want your affection. I want your love. That's what I want. And these symbols just pointing to. And so this is the essence of what the Lord is saying when he speak about these images in Deuteronomy 10 through 14 and etc. Number of images. He talked about the foreskin, the heart, the neck. But his point is clear. Circumcision was a sign of the covenant, but it was an outward sign. And God wanted their heart.
Pastor?
He also, go ahead.
The idea of circumcising the heart, yes, it's talking about love for God, but, we think of circumcision as something that sets something apart, so that it's not just the usual type of situation. So I would say, yes, this is love, but how do you demonstrate it? You set yourself, your heart apart so that it belongs to God. And so the love is not just a feeling, it is an actual covenant between you and God.
All righty. All righty. Thank you. Thank you very much. Love the stranger. We moving
It's in your
on
gate.
to,
Pastor,
yes.
I wanted to make a comment and I couldn't get on, but I finally got on the circumcision.
Well, good
It's
morning.
losses.
Oh,
Good morning.
Losses.
I'm getting ready to go home, but
Okay.
what I wanted to say about the circumcision of the heart, I think about when Paul was dealing with, I forgot who it was, and he had, I guess he was going to baptize some people, some Gentiles, and they were fussing and going. The Jews were fussing, and they wanted these people to be physically, wearing the sign by being circumcised, but they didn't realize that just as that cutting away the foreskin removes impurities physically, God is saying, cut away all that evil, separate yourself from that evil and be clean physically, just as you want. And the circumcision, as we know, you already said, didn't do anything to them spiritually. It was just obedience to what he says that he wanted them to do. So the Jews have all those symbols and stuff that they, feel you do this, you got to do that, you got to do this, and don't realize that it's a spiritual thing and not just a physical sign in your body or whatever.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Elder,
Yes, sir.
if I could make a comment that's totally kind of off the subject, but you indicated that God had told Moses to go down and then come back up.
Yes.
I wanted to mention that's not a 10 or 15-minute walk.
Okay.
I've climbed Mount Sinai twice. And the fastest that we did as a family, we were really pushing it. The fastest time we had going up was 1 hour and 45 minutes.
Wow.
So with Moses
Oh, boy.
having to go down, hew out tables of stone, and then come back up,
Wow.
so I thought it would help in our minds to imagine this wasn't a stroll in the park.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. It never occurred to me the distance. Yeah. That's important too. It is related to the lesson. It's just that we didn't, I didn't even think about that aspect of it, and not only did he have to come down, he had to hew out some more tables and then go back up.
So he had to exert himself.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then carrying those heavy tables of stone.
Back up. Yeah. Yeah.
Sister Lawson, it's good to see you and hear you.
Good point.
Good
I'm sorry. What did you say?
I said it was good to hear Sister Lawson and to see her.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Yes, sir. So, excuse me. We talked about circumcising the heart, and et cetera, et cetera. And I believe that was Sister Newborn who talked about, this was to, turn into, in so many words, some kind of action. It wasn't just, emotions. And so now we get ready to get into at least some of the action that God expected to come, from their hearts. We're talking about loving the stranger. Why is it important to love the stranger? Why should we love the stranger? You don't know the stranger.
God loved us.
Well,
Go
didn't
ahead.
God to love your neighbor as thyself?
Okay.
Love thy neighbor as thyself. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart. And then he said, the other is to love your neighbor and as well as you love yourself. You love yourself. I know that. I love myself. By name with the stranger that's within my gate. Sharing with them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it was last week's lesson they talked about how God, and I don't even have a quarter up here, I'm just running my mouth. But how God, before, eternity, in eternity, he had this plan, and he loved Jesus, his son, and he loved us because of his son, or he loved us because he's God, period. But it talked about how we can be what? Motivated. We can be, I forgot what the word is. We can't love him unless he loves us. He loves us first. And ours is a response. So if he would love us, no, we weren't even made, knowing what the situation that we were going to be in and all of that he was going to go through, losing his son or giving his son. That love, God's love for us, should motivate us to love the little people that's here, the little things that we do to each other. But we can't love without the power and the motivation from God. So it's vital to know that we can love each other, but it's through the power of God only.
Mm-hmm. Very good. And that's a special kind of love. Go ahead. I thought I heard somebody.
Yes, I was just going to say, all you have to do really is, like God told them, remember you were strangers.
Right.
And remember how you got treated and what that meant to you. And I think anyone who has moved to a new place, or especially like go to another country or whatever, how the people welcome you and treat you makes all the difference in the world. If you feel alone and nobody is caring and reaching out to you, it can be a miserable feeling. But if you feel like the people are loving and welcoming, as God has welcomed us, then it makes such a difference in your experience.
Amen.
All right, good. Very good point. Very good point. I want to say also that this was not something that was actually happening in the ancient world in general. That's not what something people did, is treated strangers nicely. It wasn't a common practice, that's for sure. But God says, because of, I want you to love the stranger, and you've been a stranger, you know how it feels, as my sister said. You've been there and done that. You ought to have some empathy. You ought to be empathetic towards those. You know how it feels to be a stranger. And so I want you to love the stranger because God had loved them and he wanted them to love the stranger. But also, I think Deuteronomy 10, 17 through 19, talking about he is the God of heaven and so forth, and he's the God of gods and Lord of lords. In other words, in other words, God simply was saying, I'm not only just somebody asking for your affection and then telling you to love strangers, but I'm the sovereign of heaven and earth. I own everything. And these other gods, these other nations are worshiping are not really gods. I'm the only God. They call these gods and they bow down to them, but these gods can't hear, they can't feel, they can't touch, they can't anything. But he's saying, I'm the sovereign God. I have all power, both in heaven and earth. And beside me, there is no God, God said. Ain't no God beside me. There may be people who claim to be God, and Satan is one of them. He want to be like God in power. He ain't interested in God's character, I see. But God says, not even he's a God. I created him. I am the only God when you really boil it down, even though, you know, the Bible talks about, you know, other gods, but they are false gods and they're not really real gods. But I'm God, and beside me there is no God, he says. And I'm the maker of heaven and earth. I put everything you see here. I made everything, include you. I'm the great God. I'm the awesome God. And then he said, went on to say, I'm not partial, and I don't take bribes. He's getting into his character. He's making a difference, and he's helping or saying to Israel, why I want you to do these things. I want you to be like me. That's the essence of what he's saying. I want you to be like me. I loved you when you were a stranger. I cared for you. In fact, he went on to say, I chose you. You are special. I love you, but you're not the only one that I love. I love the stranger. I love the weak. I love the poor. I love the fatherless. I love the widow. And I want you to love them too. That's the essence of what God will say. I'm this big, powerful God, but I care. And I want you to care about strangers, about the weak, you know, and what have you. So God says, love the stranger, because that's a contrast to what's happening or what was happening in their world and what is happening in our world even now. Mm-hmm. It's a contrast. If you are a stranger, if you are weak, if you are poor, your justice is going to be different than the person who has money, fame, and power. Your justice is going to look different from theirs. But God says, I don't take bribes. I don't take gifts. I'm not partial. I'm gonna tell it just like it is. God was really distinguishing himself, and he really, by mentioning these really attributes of his character, but he wants them, the people that he's chosen, his peculiar people, to be like him. And so he says, love the stranger. You've been a stranger. And you know, y'all straighten me out if this is wrong, but you know, a person who has gone through something, the tendency is that you can, I'm not saying other people who haven't gone through it can't help, but I believe the person that has gone through something similar can better help that person, because they have tasted that experience. They have experienced what the other person has experienced, and they better know how to help them, because I came through that. Let me tell you how I made it through.
Elder?
You see, Israel was supposed to be a witness to the world. And so God wants these attributes to stick out. All right, somebody was wanting to say something because I know I'm talking too much.
Oh, that's okay. On this thing about being strangers, years ago, our family, the four of us, we arrived in Tokyo, Japan, and at the airport, and we were going to go, we had reservations at the Adventist Hospital in Tokyo to spend a few days.
Mm-hmm.
The airport was about 50 miles from town, from the hospital. As we were coming out of the airport, following the signs to the buses that would take you into town, there was a young lady at a desk. She stopped us and says, "Where are you going?" And she says, "Do you have an address that you're aiming for?" Yes. We showed her the address. She took that information and wrote it in Japanese. And she says, "That bus there," she showed us the precise bus.
Mm-hmm.
Get on that bus, go all the way until it comes to its last stop. Get off at that point and give this note to a taxi driver.
Wow.
The taxi driver will take you there. Now, en route to town, I guess there were probably about 12 people overall on the bus besides us.
Mm-hmm.
And some got off at different places, but there were 6 who stayed on the bus to the very end like we did. Now, as we were going along, there were a couple of people that spoke English. And they were curious as to where in the world were we going? You know, why are you on this bus? Because it was odd for non-Japanese to be traveling that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so we showed them the note. And 2 of them knew exactly where the hospital was. And they also told the others where we were going, and they pointed out, this place is not easy to find.
Wow.
So when we got to the last stop and everybody got off the bus, these people had their rides waiting for them. Family members were picking them up, et cetera, et cetera. But the interesting thing is, not one of them left. They took, one of them still had the note that that lady had written in Japanese. And these 2 men went from taxi driver to taxi driver showing them that note. And they would say, "Nope, nope, you don't know where this place is. Nope, you don't know where." They kept going until they found somebody they were convinced knew exactly where that hospital was.
Wow.
And only then did they take our luggage and put it in the taxi.
Mm.
And after we got in the taxi and they saw us rolling off, only then did those people start getting into their cars and leaving.
Wow.
Now,
wow.
You are in a strange place. You can't speak the language. And these people are taking such good care of you. And on the bus ride, a grandma on the bus called the children over and gave them a cake.
Wow.
And so here we felt totally safe because of their, let's say, hospitality. It was more than hospitality.
Yeah. That that's an excellent illustration as to how you can make a deep impression upon somebody else who is a stranger, but you treat them like you've known them all the time. That makes an impression. And Israel, by loving the stranger, was to make impressions upon not only the stranger, but the rest of the world. Because the ancient world didn't, it wasn't just like that. Everybody was kind, like the illustration that Dr. Newborn just gave, but it gives us a real live depiction of, you know, what being nice to a stranger can be like, and that's so important. You can't overemphasize the importance of doing something like that, loving the stranger, because God says, "I love you." Thank you for that that illustration, live illustration of and it means so much. And this, you know, this kind of thing can open the way, because a lot of times, at least in Israel, most old people didn't know nothing about the great God of heaven. But you make such a deep impression on them by being different from the rest of the world that you got an opportunity, you know, to actually, you were witnessing by your kindness, but also, you know, it could go even further than that. So very, very important. Loving the stranger, because God says, "I love the stranger," because you were a stranger, and we go into Tuesdays. You were a stranger in Egypt, in fact, but I loved you, and I was with you, and I want you to love the stranger. What is the message to ancient Israel? What should the message be to us as well? Anybody want to elaborate a little bit?
But I feel, Pastor, that we are supposed to act the same way. Even if that person didn't love us, we're supposed to love them and be there to help them. But I have seen it in some churches. Some churches, they don't even exist. You know what I'm saying?
Thank you, Sister Wisdom.
But I've seen, you know, as far as invite the person home for dinner, sometimes they don't do that. You stand around, even though, you know, you're looking, maybe someone will invite us. But I try my best. And my daughter, because, you know, she cooks. And she said, "Would you like to go home with me today?" And they said, "Oh, yes, we'll do it." They're happy to come, because we always try to fix a nice meal on Saturday, because you never know who's going to be knocking at your door and needs help.
Yeah. Thank you.
So would you do that, Pastor? If a stranger knocked on your door, would you invite them in?
No.
You couldn't do it? Someone answer me.
So if a stranger knocked on your door, would you let him in? You say?
Yes.
Is that your question? So you putting us in this predicament, and you want an answer.
But look how the Holy Spirit will press on your heart. Go ahead and invite them in. And then all of a sudden, they're just as nice as they want to be. Because we're so afraid that people are going to rob us. But if God impresses on your heart, do it.
Well, yeah. I think that's the key. You do have to be aware of,
right,
you know, the time in which we live, what people are doing. But yeah, if that's the key, the guidance, the impressions of the Holy Spirit or whatnot. But you do have to be careful.
Brother Teacher, this is Elder Taylor. Just like earlier, we're talking about love and we're talking about people, and we're just the vessels. That's sometimes we get mixed up. We take credit for doing things that it's no credit to us. Love originates with God. That's why he wanted them to be, their hearts to be circumcised, to be set apart. He was going to set them apart. He was going to bless them. He was going to make them holy. Love does not originate. Love originates with God. Therefore, everything after that, all the glory and all the praise goes to God. We forget that sometimes. That's why a lot of times we take credit for something we have no business taking credit for.
Yes, yes. Thank you for your point. Because the bottom line is God is teaching us by example how he wants us to be.
Amen.
And so it is, and you can't do it without your connection to God. You ain't gonna even want to be messing with no strangers. You ain't thinking about no strangers.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
You know, you're reminded that I was a stranger and God treated me like I was somebody. And so I'm going to have to do that for others because I know that's what he wants me to do. And so, you know, it goes back to, and just adding to what Elder just said, you know, that there is no credit to be given to us. God is working in and through us to make us like him. You see, a lot of things we do even now is because of what he's done for us. God says, you know, when you fell and was wallowing in sin, I had patience with you. I waited on you. I brought you out. But why are you being so condemning this person so fast, to hell? Because I was patient with you. When God even said to Israel, when y'all was worshiping that calf, and God was telling Moses, look, get back, Moses, let me wipe these people out. Let me wipe them out. And Moses said, no, Lord, don't wipe them out. Because if you wipe them out, you're going to wipe me out. And what would the other nations say? And God said, get back, Moses. But we read in the spirit of prophecy, God wanted Moses to intercede for the people, even though they were doing wrong. Ellen White says Moses was being like God for interceding people when God's anger rose up because of what he had done for them, and then now they down there worshiping their king. God is trying to make us like him, but there is no credit to us. We can only be like him as we stay connected with him and allow his power and grace to flow through us, molding us, shaping us into his image. And so there is no credit to me or you, but I'm just trying to follow the example that he has given to me. And not just the command, but God has demonstrated his love to us. And he wants us to demonstrate it.
Pastor?
Towards others. Yes. Yes.
Yes. During the time of slavery, blacks came here as strangers. They came came against their will. They were captives. And there were times when people had an opportunity to do what was right or helpful to them and did not. But the story of the Underground Railroad is a beautiful story of people who took strangers, complete strangers, into their homes and hid them to help them get to a place of freedom. Those people were very unselfish. They didn't know whether the people would harm them or not, but they opened their homes and hid those people until they could move on safely.
Mm-hmm. That's an excellent point, and excellent point, Sister Newborn, and it really gets.
And how he dealt with the teachers of the law, and look at the way Christ dealt with every single.
Say that again. The last person that spoke. Would you repeat that? Okay. Well, anyway, good point, Sister Newborn. And that calls for self-forgetfulness. You mentioned bringing strangers into their home and so forth. You know, they were slaves. They didn't know that they, you know, wouldn't be harmed, but they brought them in. You know, they would do it. They were so caught up in doing what they believed to be right that they weren't worried about their own safety.
Pastor, considering the times that we're living in, the needs that people have, and it's a bad place to be on this earth right now. But as long as we have that, we better have that connection with Christ. And if we do, and we're listening to his voice, and we're doing whatever, even if it's a stranger knocking on your door, and you're doing it out of love, and you know God is directing you to do that, then there's nothing to fear, because he's the same God now that he was. But we just have to make sure of our connection with him and make sure that he is telling us to do that, and whatever we do is going to be all right.
Yeah. In other words, don't throw away your five senses. You have to be aware of the time in which you live and all of that, you know, and plus what you said, you know, as well. But yeah, you can't totally discard that. Now you have people just taking people, you know, you got people who are, you know, they got, what do they call it? They kidnap people and put them in slavery.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, they're doing that. They got some modern day things that are going on. You have to have your wits about you. But sure, you got to be God led. You ought to be God directed. But don't just, you know, throw caution to the wind, because, you know, you're living in a time where, you know, it could be your very end, the end of you. So, you know, you gotta balance the two, you know, even though Israel back in those days didn't have to worry about that as much. But yes, you have to be careful that you don't just throw caution to the wind. And I think the key is being led of the Lord. And I think that if you're led of the Lord, then the Lord is going to, you know, take care of you. And even if it means, you know, it may mean losing your life at, you know, time. But if God is leading, then let God lead. And you know, and you feel within your heart, this is what he wants you to do. But like I said, you have to weigh that against, you know, don't just totally throw all caution to the, you know, to the wind without considering the circumstances and everything that is to go into that. Because you don't, you know, he gave you that for a reason too. So anyway, so much for that. The stranger within your gates. All right. And I think we've said quite a bit. Anybody want us to have any final comments about the stranger within the gates?
If I might, Elder.
Yes, sir.
The piece of that really squeezes me is the biblical statement that by entertaining strangers, some have entertained angels without knowing it.
Unaware.
Yeah.
And that's the piece that bothers me. When we were living in Nairobi, every week there was this one man who would knock on the door. He was always exceedingly polite, exceedingly gentle, and always drunk.
Drunk? Oh.
But he was incredibly polite. And he had the same story, same line, I almost memorized it, where he was begging. And I would remind him, what have I told you about coming here drunk? He could repeat to me my line. And he says, and here I am again, sir. And I've been drinking. The thing that baffled me was his gentleness, his politeness. You know, generally when they're drunk, they're belligerent.
Yeah.
But he was in.
Right.
All right. And then I comforted myself by saying, no, an angel is not going to pretend he was drunk. So I did all kinds of things trying to comfort myself that I wasn't sending an angel away, but it really bothered me.
But Pastor Newborn, could that happen? Could that happen that man, that stranger who was drunk, could have been an angel? Do you think so?
Well,
No?
I said no because he was
I
drunk.
don't know.
But, you know, but I did that to soothe my conscience because I needed some help. So, I'm praying that it wasn't an angel, still to this day.
You never know. You never know. You never know.
Well, you know, I would just say that we are enriched by your which most of us have not had that experience, but you've been in many lands and had many different experiences, which is enriching to us.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Anyway,
That's right.
So I can appreciate. I definitely can appreciate you sharing some of your mission stories, man, that are live and real, that you've actually gone through. The last thing I would say about strangers in Egypt is Matthew 7:12, down at the bottom of that day's lesson, Tuesday's lesson, which talked about, in other words, and this is something that we learn as children: do unto others as you would have them to do unto you. The Bible says, whatsoever things ye would that men do to you, do ye even so to them. So you kind of putting yourself in a situation and say, now, how would I want to be treated if I was that person? You know what I mean? And then proceed with God's help to treat that person the way you would want to be treated.
That's right. Ooh.
So we have some guidelines in dealing with, strangers. That was some pretty, I really like that. The admonition to Israel about how they were to treat outcasts was not by any means the norm of the ancient world. It wasn't normal. God wasn't asking them to do what everybody else is doing. In fact, he asking them to be a little different from everybody else and treat the stranger with some kindness and some niceness. That's what he was saying, because that wasn't a common practice. Where outcasts could be treated in some cases no better than animals, even if that well. So in contrast, God was saying, I want you to be different because I want you to be a light unto the nation. I want you to be my witness. So when you treat strangers in a special way, you witnessing.
Oh, yes.
You are witnessing when you are kind to a stranger and you go overboard. You go out your way, as Dr. Newborn said that the folk on that bus did for them, and made sure that there was a taxi driver who could, and they wouldn't leave until they made sure that they found somebody that knew where this hospital was or wherever place they were going, so that they knew that they could get there safe. So that's a form of witnessing how we treat strangers. And God says, I want you to be different because you've been a stranger. You ought to know.
That's right.
And you know what? I got a question, and then I'm gonna move right along. I got a question. But we as Black folk been through a lot, not have always been welcome, you know, in this world, even though this nation is the best nation in the world on paper. Martin Luther King said, if we decide to live up to the creeds and principles that are on that paper, we sure enough be a great nation. But no, I kind of lost my thought in saying that was a point I wanted to make right quick, and I just kind of lost my thought in the middle of trying to say too much. But anyway, we're going to move on to Wednesday's lesson, and we want to talk about. We want to. Excuse me, just a moment. We want to talk about judging righteously, and I'm gonna. If somebody want to help us out there,
Wednesday.
I want you to just begin talking about righteous judging or anything you want point that you'd like to make before we actually get in to the lesson study. Judging righteously. Or you can make a point from the lesson. I just want to give you a chance to say something. If those who
the very first line of that week tells it right away. As believers, we have been called to reflect the character of God. And right. Paul wrote, "My little children," you know, that was it right there. "For whom I labor in birth again until Christ is formed in you." That we have been called to reflect the character of God. Now, are we doing that? You know, and we have to ask ourselves that. We have to ask ourselves that. And then,
we are called to reflect the character of God.
Yes.
Look, judging righteously, that means that we can't be influenced by nobody else to do otherwise.
That's right.
Right? We're living in a time where somebody slip you a few dollars and they'll pervert the truth. You know what I mean? And send somebody off to prison. You know, and especially judges in key places, you know, you take gifts. and this is very important. You've got, and I'm gonna deviate a little bit from the lesson, but it's related to the lesson. You've got senators and lawmakers who are given gifts by certain companies who have representatives there who influence lawmaking so that it can make them more money. And you have people voting for laws because they get money, they get bribes, really. When you take a gift from a company or anybody, and you are in a situation like you in to make decisions as to, you know, making right and wrong a lot of times. And then because you've been given a gift, you've been given 50,000, 100,000 by this company because you know when it's time for re-election, you have some money to, you know, to get back in there. Then the tendency is for you to vote according to what that person is trying to get for themselves so that they can make more money with their company. You know, taking bribe, this is something alive and well these days. But if you don't accept these gifts, then you ain't, you know, because if you take a gift, you know, folk gonna expect something in return. And we deal with that. It says, Deuteronomy 1:16 says, judge righteously between your brother and strangers. Deuteronomy 16:19 says, don't wrest judgment. In other words, don't have a respect of person. Don't take gifts. Deuteronomy 24:17. Don't pervert the judgment of the stranger, the fatherless, the widow, the poor. Just because, let's say you end up in court somewhere. But if you don't have money to get you a decent lawyer, you probably already gone to prison, that is, because you ain't got nobody to defend you. But if you had money to get you a judge, somebody stand up there and, and speak for you, even if you're innocent, I'm talking about.
Lord have mercy.
So I mean, this thing about judging righteously is, I think is having a heavy impact these days in a time when these billionaires are giving thousands and in some cases millions of dollars to make laws that are anti certain people, certain things. For an example, the stand your ground law.
Yeah.
I never could make sense out of that. Stand your ground.
Yeah.
When you really get into that, when you really get deep into that, and you think about the things that have gone down thus far, you would think that righteous people, are behind that law, but really that law on its face is done a lot of harm, man. You got people dead because it came under the stand your ground law. Trayvon Martin is one of them. He's dead. And the guy's not guilty because of the stand your ground law. And the guy's the one that got it started. I'm gonna say this and I'm gonna move on because I know I'm a little bit off, but it's related. And I'm talking about not taking gifts and bribes and you bring in laws that are not good laws, that are really harmful to certain people. And to some people, it don't even apply to. The black lady. I don't know if you heard this, but I'm going to throw this one on out there as well. Who, her and her husband was fighting and so forth. And he's trying to, jump on her and so forth. And she shot through the roof and said, she's giving the guy warning, I'm not going to let you harm me. Now leave me alone. She went to prison anyway for shooting into the roof. Now, she didn't shoot him. She shot into the roof. But the stand your ground law, some kind of way didn't apply to her by her shooting into the roof. Now, had she shot him, she might have been still free. But I'm just saying there are some perverted laws on the books, y'all, that don't make sense to me at all. Anyway, let's go because I'm staying on that. I'm staying on that too long.
Yes.
You see, this goes deeper than just mere jurisprudence. Ye shall be holy, for the Lord your God is holy. Yes, they knew who the true God was, and they had the correct form of worship, and they brought the right kinds of offerings, and all that was fine. But in the end, what good was all that if they were mistreating the weak, the poor that were among them?
Lord have mercy.
Again and again in the prophets, the Lord rails against the oppressors of the poor and the needy in Israel. How can you be holy and mistreat others at the same time?
My Lord. You can't.
You can't, regardless of how strictly you adhere to proper religious rituals. How you treat others is going to matter way more than that. And that's why, you know, we need to be more than just religious. We need to be spiritual.
Lord have mercy. All right.
All right. We're out of time. I ain't even looked at a watch, y'all. It's 10:09.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. We got to quit. I'm sorry. We're gonna turn this time back over, but folks, in conclusion, I guess we can say we are strangers in this world, and we need to be careful how we treat other people.
Yes.
Because God has treated us well. When we were strangers, we need to treat other people well. And that's a witness in and of itself. And that is different from, in general, the way the world is. I conclude with that. You are back into the hands of the host. I'm sorry. I wish somebody had pulled my coattail, because I wasn't looking at the clock. In fact, ain't no clock on my iPad that I'm looking at.
All right now.
Thank you, Pastor, and to all the participants who shared their wonderful points and testimonies. If there are no more additional announcements, we will end the meeting now, and we'll see you in our divine worship at 11 o'clock.
Amen.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I will request our pastor to close with a prayer.
Let's bow our heads. Our God and our Father, may we take to heart the things that we talked about this morning. And may what we said just not be the right answer, but things that we practice in our lives. Help us, we pray. And be with us as we transition from Sabbath school, the church at study, to divine worship at 11.